Hey, I'm Evan and this is Jenny, and for more than a decade, we've been helping leaders just like you help people overcome trauma. And the things that we're going to teach you in today's Reboot Leadership Academy, these are not things that we learned in some book. These are things that we had to learn the hard way. And so we're going to give you everything you need to be able to be successful.
So welcome to the Reboot Leadership Academy. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Reboot Leaders Academy. We could not be more excited. Not only have you taken the step towards saying you want to become a leader, but now you are completing the training needed to do it successfully. You know, we're going to be kind of using a panel approach to be able to teach this, so it's not just me talking the entire time. I'm joined by two folks who have been with this organization since basically the very beginning. The first, on the far side, is my wife. Jenny's actually the co-founder of the organization, and she actually started Reboot. She was the original seed of the idea. And then next, I have Brian Flannery, who's been with Reboot since I think the dinosaurs walked there or something like that. So, I mean, he's been around for a long.
Since the Dead Sea was just sick.
That's right. Well played. You know, and Brian, he's led more courses and done more outreach than anybody else on our team.
That's true.
And so today we're going to be sharing with you specifically what we call our basic training session. And really what the goal of this session is to give you, to sort of imprint on you or to transfer to you the core DNA, really what is and who is Reboot as an organization. And so we're going to be dividing up some topics. Feel free to take some notes and follow along as we get started. So often, Jenny, I'm going to come to you with the first question, if that's okay. So often, a lot of people ask the question, well, what is Reboot? And that's actually not a super simple question to answer.
Hard.
It can be a little challenging. So why don't you give them a little background on how did we get here and who are we as an organization? She's going to share some history with us.
Well, we all know that trauma impacts the body and the mind, but we're here because we believe that trauma impacts the soul. And this can manifest itself in a lot of different symptoms like anxiety, depression, social withdrawal, and even in most tragic situations, suicide. But at Reboot, we believe that these symptoms can be tied back to what's called a soul wound. And these soul wounds can represent themselves with unresolved grief, with unforgiveness or bitterness, with loss of identity. And really what a soul wound is your personal intersection with the brokenness of the world. And that can lead you to lose trust in God, lose trust in your fellow man, and sometimes even lose trust in yourself. But if trauma or a soul wound is your intersection with the brokenness of the world, we believe that recovery is your personal intersection with the redemptive heart of God, and that is really what Reboot is all about. So, in short, Reboot is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that helps people overcome trauma and embrace a brighter future. And we do this through our faith-based, community-driven healing courses and our online community, My Reboot. Our courses are unique in that they provide a blend of Christian faith-based support and clinical insight. And our courses are safe, they're private, and they're peer-led. Childcare and a pre-discussion meal are often provided on a weekly basis to make attending easier for families. And we encourage the participation of loved ones because we know that trauma impacts the entire family. Each meeting lasts approximately 2 hours in length and is led by a team of peer leaders.
Yeah, I love the three things you highlighted there, right? Reboot is faith-based, it's peer-led, and it's outcomes-driven.
Actually, I don't think I said outcomes-driven, but it is outcomes-driven.
She should have said those three things, right? But no, those are three things, right? That we're faith-based, we're peer-led, and we're outcomes-driven, which I think is sometimes those things don't necessarily go together. And I think sometimes when we're talking to people, they'll ask us questions like, well, is Reboot is that like a support group, or is it like a Bible study or something like that? Brian, I mean, how do you handle those kind of questions when they ask you those things?
Yeah, simply put, I mean, yes, Reboot is a group, but no, we're not a support group. Although we are a group that gives support, there is a stigma associated with support groups, right? That people assume when they walk into a support group that XYZ is going to happen, where Reboot is a course.
Right.
Reboot is hard. For many of our participants, it's the biggest struggle that they've had since their trauma. Because there's discussion, there's homework, there's assignments, and at the same time, the topics that we're talking about, it's not how did you feel when, but it's, hey, let's talk about grief. Let's talk about the roots of trauma. Let's talk about making wise decisions. For me, one of the hardest ones was, let's talk about depression and disengagement.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to know, like, when you sign up for Reboot, you know it's a course, you know that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So explaining that to people, it's not just something that you're signing up for that could go on forever, but it is something people can wrap their minds around. If you've been through any other type of course, you kind of know what to expect.
Yeah, and Brian, we've always made a promise to graduates, right? We've always kind of said, we can promise you this, but not this. What is that we always say?
Yeah, we always promise them that if they go through the program, life will become gumdrops and rainbows, and it'll be super simple forever.
Well, that's what Brian promises, because
that's
his
the one.
groups are amazing.
No, we don't promise that, right? And we don't promise that. We don't promise that your symptoms will simply go away upon graduation, right? What we do promise is that despite the trauma, despite the past, despite everything that you've been through, you can live a life with joy and peace. You can return to even an elevated place than you were, even with symptoms.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think, our culture is so diagnosis driven, right? A lot of times the first question you ask when you go in for a traditional therapy appointment is, well, what's your diagnosis?
Right.
What medications are you taking? And I really think we want to take a holistic view and look at them as a person. And some of these topics that we talk about, Brian already mentioned some of them, and you can see them in your book. These are designed really, as he said, to get to the root issues that oftentimes present as symptoms. You guys remember back in school when we used to have to make photocopies, and like you would make a copy of a page and then somebody else would make a copy of that page and then make a copy, and because the copiers were all like dirty and old back then, like it would add a little bit of black spots to it, so pretty soon like you could smell the fresh ink coming from the carbon in the printer, but you could barely read the document. I think that with us, one of the things that we're sensitive to, I mean, it's not just the three of us leading courses anymore here in Tennessee where Reboot started. We've got hundreds of groups on several continents and multiple countries around the world. And so how do we make sure that the group that's meeting in the Philippines is similar to the group that's meeting in Durham, North Carolina, is like the group that's meeting in Alaska? I mean, these are complex challenges. And so one of the things that we had to answer early on is not just who are we, which we just kind of spent time answering, but maybe more importantly or more helpful sometimes is to say this: who are we not, and what do we not do? Right? And so I want to give you just a few things, 3 things that Reboot is not. First off, we are not affiliated with any specific brand or denomination of church. A lot of people have had issues where maybe they've got some baggage, some woundedness because of a certain denomination. And so we work with all different types of Christian churches around the world, right? But we're not loyal, or we don't have any specific backing by one specific denomination. Number 2, we don't provide professional or pastoral counseling. We're not a substitute, in other words, for professional intervention or care. There will be people in your courses who need to continue or need to begin, perhaps, that more escalated or more professional grade of care. And that's why we're so grateful to partner with so many great clinicians around the country. And so we don't want to be a substitute for that, and we definitely don't want to come across as if we are competing with that. We are complementary. We are addressing the spiritual root while someone else maybe addresses the emotional or the mental from a different perspective. Number 3 is we're not responsible for recruiting all of your participants. Yes, we're going to help, and we're going to give you a lot of training today in a later session about how we help and how you can go about outreach. But when you look around your group, your size and the people in it, the number of people in your group, really depends on your efforts and activity. Yes, we're going to help. Yes, we're going to probably help get a few people there. But it's really your responsibility locally, because you're the one who knows that community. You're indigenous, if you will, to that culture. And they're not going to care or know who any of us are. Right. But they're going to care and know who you are because you love them and you're an active part of that community. And sometimes people can feel like, okay, well, I've led Bible studies before, but this feels different. This feels like a much bigger requirement, right? I hear that all the time. And I think sometimes people almost get a little bit anxious or worried about what is expected of me as a leader. So Brian, hit on a few of these. I know we've listed a lot. What are some of the things, Brian and Jenny, you guys can jump in on this one. What are some of the expectations we have of them as leaders who are watching this?
Yeah, one of the things to know before you know your expectations, Reboot's also not a highway of faith, right? There are long-term highways of faith. Those are called churches.
Right.
We are not that. We are more of an on-ramp or a returning ramp for those that have taken a break. And knowing that is important, because with that being in mind, leading a reboot group can seem overwhelming. There's a phrase that I absolutely love called, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right.
Right? When you look at everything that's getting ready to go on in 12 weeks and knowing that you're a part of the leadership team and it's your responsibility, it can seem so overwhelming. But the same way to lead a reboot is the same way you eat an elephant.
Right.
One bite at a time. And knowing how difficult and daunting it can seem with everything coming up, Reboot has created the Reboot Leaders Checklist. That's available on your My Reboot account, and it is phenomenal. It literally walks step by step by step through everything that needs to be done before group, during group, after group, to make sure that you are utilizing all of your talents to facilitate this group. And so that's an amazing asset. Make sure that you check that out. Again, it's on your My Reboot account. Excuse me. One of the biggest things is to encourage your participants to take the enter and exit surveys. As both Jenny and Evan said just a couple moments ago, we are outcomes driven, meaning there are eyes on whether or not we're actually effective or not, and we can sit around and say, all the stories of the 10,000 plus graduates that we've seen change their lives, people don't care. They want to hear it from them.
Right.
They want to know from the horse's mouth that, yes, my 12 weeks at Reboot was worth it, and this is why.
Right.
That's good.
So yeah.
What else, guys? Other expectations for the leaders?
I wanted to highlight, there are a lot of resources available to leaders on My Reboot. We have national resource partners. There's a list of different organizations that can help your participants with various things like addiction or parenting or marriage. But also, this is really important, is that we want you to link arms with local resources in your community, because we know that Reboot's mission is this, and we can't expect you to be doing all of this as well. So if somebody has additional needs for crisis intervention or counseling or financial needs, it's really important before you start your group that you've already identified what those local resources are, have a relationship with them so that that handoff is really easy.
That's great.
You know, when I look at these lists, there's some other ones here, but I will say that, yes, leading a Reboot course requires more commitment than just facilitating a regular study on the book of James. It does. But I will tell you, the reward is so great that it won't feel like work. Right now, because you're not seeing the actual impact of the mission, it can sometimes feel like a lot of administration, checking items off a list, prepping things, getting your team built, all that stuff. I'm telling you, by week 4 or 5, you won't even remember that this took some effort. It'll just be so joyful.
Brian, could you share a little bit about the coaching opportunity that the participants have?
Absolutely. Reboot is mission focused, and the only way that we're mission focused on helping people overcome trauma is by us as a headquarters element supporting our leaders as much as we can.
Right.
And that being the case, one of the opportunities that we saw that would be awesome is you as a leader can go onto your My Reboot account, you can click on the schedule a coaching call, and at your convenience, you can schedule a call with our coaches where for 30 minutes, they'll jump on and they'll talk about whatever you want to. You want to talk about outreach, you want to talk about something that happened in groups, something somebody's saying, signs you're potentially seeing, that is your time. And both of our coaches have a ton of experience in leadership. And at the same time, to segue, also, we have monthly huddles where
That's good. I'm glad you brought that up.
You can jump onto Zoom. There's really not a dedicated topic. There's things that we're going to talk about, but at the same time, it's our opportunity as a headquarters element to hear from you, the leaders, and talk about what you want to. And it always varies. how many leaders, because it's not a requirement, but the last 2 we've had a ton of leaders on, and the conversation has been great because you're not just hearing from headquarters, but you're hearing from fellow leaders that are talking about what they're experiencing, what they've been through, and how closely the two are connected.
Kind of a reboot group for reboot leaders, right?
That's right. That's exactly what.
I mean, you guys are hitting the nail on the head too. It's almost like we planned this, you know. I think that what you're getting at too is actually part of the core DNA that is Reboot. There's 3 elements that we always talk about, sort of make up our DNA: community, family, and service. And that thing that Brian was just talking about really ties into community, and that all of us are learning from one another. It's not always top-down learning. A lot of times it's sideways, right? Yes. We learn in circles, not in rows kind of idea. And so as I think about this idea of community, I can promise that in my experience, most of the major breakthrough in groups has happened because of the community that has been built.
That's right.
Meaning I believe that loving, trusting relationships are the bedrock foundation of long-term healing.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a safe community, if you don't have that sense of community within your group, and it's only you lecturing, you're doing it wrong. Because yes, what you say and what I say and what we say is important, but sometimes it's what they'll say to each other that is so much more important. And we have to foster an environment for that without letting it get out of hand, of course. And as you develop this, some of our groups use a meal time to do this, as Jenny mentioned. Some of the groups will meet for 2 hours per week. They'll spend the first 45 minutes or an hour just eating together and getting to know each other. And that's not a waste of time. That's not a optional thing for those groups. They put that in place because they know that fellowship time, that time of building community, is just as valuable as the second hour.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right? Jenny, what's the second piece of our DNA?
Well, the second piece is family, and I think of that kind of when it comes to the larger Reboot community as well as the individual's family. As Evan said, we are bringing people together and we're building this loving, trusting community, and that really represents a family to me. I remember when I wrote the first email summary between weeks 1 and week 2 for our groups, like way back in 2011, and I was like, what do I type? Hey everybody, hey guys, hey folks. It came out, hey, Reboot family. And we'd only met like 1 or 2 times at that point, but I already felt like what we were building was a family, a place where it's safe to be who you are, where you know that you're gonna be loved no matter what, where you know you can ask the hard questions or be vulnerable or wear your hat and your sunglasses the whole time because you just don't feel comfortable opening up, that people are gonna let you be, and that's a family. And so we've seen some amazing transformations of how people have overcome those barriers and become part of the family. That same guy who wore the hat and sunglasses weeks later is like picking up other people's kids and bringing in buckets of fried chicken. So hopefully you'll see that as well, but definitely fostering that family environment is so vital. And then the next layer of that, again, is the participants' family. One of our core DNA pieces is that we welcome the family and we make it easy for them to come. We provide a meal and childcare so that families don't have to scramble to put that together. And unlike a lot of other programs, especially even in the VA, we don't separate out the person who's experienced trauma and their spouse, because we know that that trauma has impacted them both. It has ripple effects, and that they're both going to be able to learn from each other if we put them in a room where they can share openly and bring some of those taboo topics out of the deep recesses and into the light. And they're going to also learn from other people in the group who are in the same role as them. So spouses are listening to other spouses and hearing stories of overcoming and of hope that maybe they didn't think were possible. So there's so much power in including the family. And so we want that to be something that you remember as a core element of our DNA.
That's great. And then Brian, what's the third one?
Service, which is another double entendre. That's a big word for this guy. That's right. Anyway, so with service, I remember my first cycle of Reboot, right? We were getting halfway through it, and there was a week that really impacted me. And when I say it impacted me, it kicked me directly in the chest. And I remember approaching my leader at the time, who is you.
Yes.
And I remember saying, I don't know what it looks like, but I need to be a part of this, right? And that service is a part of the DNA of who we are, because oftentimes as people start to heal from their trauma, as they start to change the roots, they desire nothing more than to help somebody else change theirs.
That's right.
I have a sign that hangs in my closet every morning when I get dressed that says, if I can help one person get from where I was to where I am, it's worth it. And across the country, across the world, for our graduates, that is a statement that holds a ton of weight. Because helping other people, like, yes, my first cycle of Reboot, there was healing that was started. But since then, continuing to lock arms and help other people overcome trauma took what I thought could be healing and blew it out of the water and broke that ceiling.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
That's so good, right? So community, family, and service. And what Brian was just talking about, we always say that we want to help people find purpose in their pain. What better purpose than to take something as terrible as trauma and recycle it and transform it into purpose of helping the next person in line? And so what we want to do now is we want to pause. We know we've given you a lot of information. So I'd like to give you a chance to answer some questions, to sort of commit to memory what we just shared here, but also give you a chance to kind of talk amongst yourself and maybe brainstorm a little bit on some of these. And you'll see some questions in your workbook. So what I'd like you to do now is press pause. We'll be here when you get back. And then when you're done discussing, press play, and we'll move into the next portion of this session. All right, so hopefully you had a chance to have some discussion amongst yourselves as a group. Let's test and see how well you answered them, how accurate your answers were. If you didn't write anything, you failed. If you wrote something and it's wrong, it's okay. You get points for trying, and if you get the right answer, I don't know, you get a gold star or something like that. I don't know, something cool. All right, so the first one, how would you describe the course to someone that you meet? Who wants to take that one? All right, Jenny, go for it.
I think I read this earlier, so hopefully I'll get it right. Reboot is a course that helps people overcome trauma and embrace a brighter future.
That's right. And we talked about there's 3 elements to that, which is we're peer-led, we're
faith-based, and outcomes-driven.
And outcomes-driven. That's right.
One of the answers to the one below, but we'll add to it.
Great. Well, I gave you the answer already twice because I am helpful that way. Number 2, what's the desired end result or goal for a course participant? Brian.
Gumdrops and rainbows.
Yes, that is also correct. Judges, we accept that answer.
No, the desired goal is that despite trauma, despite your past, despite the soul wound, that the participant can still live a life of joy and peace.
That's right.
Beautiful.
That's right. We want to help people again find purpose in their pain. That's right. What makes this course unique from other programs? What makes this course unique? Go ahead.
We include the family, spouse, partner, I forgot to mention this earlier, sometimes even parents.
Right. You don't have to buzz every time. There's no real buzzer there, guys. You guys are so geeky. Game. There's no real buzzer.
I believe, as a wise man said seconds ago, faith-based,
peer-led.
Peer-led. I know this. Hold on.
This is going remarkably well.
Faith-based, peer-led, outcomes-driven.
Yeah, this is a good thing that we're reviewing for ourselves, evidently, here today. Hopefully this is bringing some humor to your life, because this is real, right? Yeah, I think that's great. Community, faith, family, all those elements are things that differentiate us. What are the 3 important components of our DNA? I already said this: community, family, and service. We just talked about this a little bit ago. These are 3 things that are vital to us, and within that, these are things that if you have these elements existing within your group, you're likely going to have the kind of outcomes that you hear us talk about. What are some of the topics you covered? We've actually included a sample chapter for you a little bit later in this workbook for you that you can flip through, but some of you may already have your leader guide as well, in which case a sample chapter you don't need because you can look through all the chapters. But as you do look at that, you can see in the very front of the book there's a full listing of those topics too that you can refer to, as well as you can flip a couple pages back and see the complete list to see, did you get any of those topics correct? And the last 2 questions we put there really for you to be able to have some discussion. And hopefully as you wrote the answer to the last one, what are you most excited about? Hopefully this is something that you guys can make a prayer point and an encouragement point for each other as a leadership team.
That's good.
So, now that we've had some time for a discussion, what I'd like to do is I'm going to kick it over to Jenny. And Jenny is now going to walk us through a checklist of what it's going to look like to get ready to launch your group. She's going to lead you through the entire process. And as you do, you can follow along in your workbooks.
Now we're going to tackle the new course timeline. And this is a really helpful tool for you to use because it gives you a visual of kind of all the steps that you're going to need to complete leading up to, throughout your course, and even after your course. So let's dive in. The first is your stage one, that's getting started. This is going to take place in the 8 weeks, ideally, prior to your course start date. That gives you all the time you need to get prepared. And that step is to begin the leader checklist. Now, this is going to be your best friend. We've said this before when it comes to leading your group, and it's located in your My Reboot account. It's your leader checklist. It's all the steps that you need to do before, during, and after your course sessions to make sure you stay on track and that you have all of the resources in place. So log into your My Reboot account and make sure you select your program and go to your checklist and complete those steps. The next step is to recruit and train your leaders. So gather interested people around you and complete this training, which is what you're doing right now. And during this time, it's really important that you identify your roles. So the primary leader, the co-leader, who's going to be your outreach coordinator, and other support roles, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. Next is to determine your start date and time, so all the logistics that you need to think about kind of how you're going to lay your courses out throughout the year. Consider that most courses do 2 rotations a year, some do 3, primarily in the spring and then in the fall, but some do a summer rotation. But it's important to keep in mind that you want a 12-week span that's uninterrupted for your course, because it's really hard if you stop for holidays and things to kind of get everyone back together and get back on track. And that you're going to be setting aside at least 2 hours a week, and definitely some additional hours for preparation and for one-on-one meetings, but 2 hours a week, half hour for the meal, and about an hour and a half for the discussion and for the session material to be presented. Also, you need to think about if you're going to be providing that meal and childcare and kind of what the logistics surrounding that will be. And think about your space. I mean, you want a space that's going to be comfortable and accommodating, that's going to be accessible to all your participants. So thinking through those logistics, also considering whether you'll be meeting virtually, and there's additional information about leading a virtual course on the checklist as well. And finally, once you know all those logistics, you want to submit them to our HQ team using the intake form. So that gives us the information that we need to be able to help start promoting your course and making sure you have all the materials that you need in the time that you need them. The second stage is where we're talking about awareness and outreach. And this, again, is still happening up until your start date. The first step is to engage your community. This is so important because you want to have people show up when you're there on your week one. You want to make sure you have all the seats filled, as many as you can. And so this starts with identifying referral partners in your community, posting flyers, even contacting local media outlets, and we can help you with those press releases and what that would look like. Talking to other churches or other places in the community that are going to be coming in contact with the types of folks that you want to serve, whether those be veterans, first responders, or other people who may be receiving care for PTSD or mental health struggles. Also building relationships with local businesses that might want to help you, thinking about getting meals provided, or businesses that can help you with outreach through events or through, again, posting signage. You might even be able to link up with folks for childcare, volunteers through your church or through other organizations that can provide that. So engaging your community is a really, really important step that you don't want to skip over. And then step 2 is executing your plan. So something that we recommend is to host or participate in some kind of event during this time frame, an event that is centered around your cause, whether it be veterans, first responders, or other folks dealing with trauma, or even hosting like an informational session. So casting a wide net and just saying, who in my community might be intrigued by this, because that's going to really enable you to make those important connections with people who are going to come alongside you, and whether they help you in a material way or pray for you or invite folks, you really need to just build this team and get those people in your corner. Also, of course, social media. We say blitz your social media networks and ask your friends or your followers to share your posts as well. The good thing is that we provide you with graphics and templates for this, so you don't have to create those yourself. But be sure when you're putting out this information that you include specifics like your start date and time and a call to action. So where people can go to register, get that link in there so people know what to do with this. And also make sure it's shareable. So you go to the privacy settings on your posts, make sure it's public so that people can share that and help you. And again, you might during this time meet again with your referral partners and empower them to do outreach by giving them the specifics. I know when I was working at Fort Campbell, I did a lot of networking with other healthcare providers, case managers, chaplains. Every time a course rotation was coming, even the public affairs office at Fort Campbell at the hospital, I'd let them know, hey, we've got a new start date coming. Here's our flyer. Can you print it, post it? Can you put it on their Facebook page for the hospital? Getting the word out in as many weeks as possible in advance so that people can start registering. And it really did help. It multiplied my efforts as a leader. And of course, we want to seek out participants directly. We know, and Brian's talked about this, there's nothing more powerful than a direct invite. So looking for those people in your own networks who you've watched and observed and who you know might be hurting. Maybe invite them to the course and just say, hey, would you come sit with me for these 12 weeks and just see how it impacts your life? And let them know that you'll be there with them every step of the way. You can even run your own Facebook ad. We're going to run Facebook ads on your behalf, but you can run your own Facebook ads and we can help you with that as well if you want to use that to target a specific audience. So next is, how does the registration process work? Because you want to understand this so that when you're communicating it to your referral partners, they feel comfortable explaining it to people and so that participants know kind of what to expect. So it's important to direct them to rebootrecovery.com/join. They can fill out the registration form there. We get a little bit of basic information from them, and then that sends an auto response to the participant as soon as they've registered, which instructs them to start their My Reboot account. But it also sends a notification to you or to whoever on your team you've identified to be your admin person. And this is so, so important that within 48 hours, you guys need to reach out to that person, ideally multiple ways: phone call, text message, and email, because you want to make sure that this person who has stepped out in a vulnerable place, said, I need help, feels received, and not that their registration has fallen on deaf ears. And I know things get busy and hectic, but you got to be watching your email and your text messages like a hawk and make sure that you jump on that. And as intimidating as it can be, from my experience, a phone call is the best follow-up because they know there's a real person on the other side of this, because maybe they saw a Facebook ad and they're like, I don't even know if this thing is legit. They can hear from you, hear your heart. You can hear a little bit about their story, whatever they're willing to share. So that gives you some background before you meet on week one as to what they're going to need and what they're hoping to get out of the course. So definitely reach out within 48 hours. And in that time frame, also give them the specifics of your course, letting them know the start date, the time, the location, or if it's on Zoom, the Zoom link. So get that information out. All right, so the third stage is launching and leading. So we've finally gotten to your start date. And these steps occur during start date and the 12 weeks following that. So step one is, again, to reference your checklist before and after each meeting. These steps are important to make sure that you continually engage your participants and that they are completing the course and that you're staying on track with the material. Another important thing that I like to remember is to, at week one and even the first few weeks, because sometimes you have people kind of trickling in, make sure you collect names and emails and phone numbers of your participants, because sometimes people show up that didn't register, or maybe a spouse registered on behalf of their loved one, but that you don't have that person's contact information directly. So make sure you get that, because you're going to be using that to send your weekly check-in emails, to remind people of things, to share them encouragement. You might even start like a private Facebook group. You just want to stay in communication with your participants. Again, following the steps each week that are in your checklist, preparing and praying. We want to make sure that you start that process like 3 or 4 days before your weekly session. So do not cram. Do not wait till the day of to start preparing, because you want the Lord to be preparing your heart and to be the Holy Spirit to be giving you wisdom and insight as to what you need to share beyond the curriculum or from your own experience that can enrich it. So take time for that and pray. Invite your team to pray with you and for you. Invite your prayer shield. I don't know if we've talked about this, but identifying folks in your community who are going to lift you up with prayer each week is really, really vital. Evan and I had that from the beginning, and we definitely felt uplifted every week and encouraged knowing that people were praying for us and we could share specific needs with them along the way that they could pray for. And so it's so important to have that prayer shield. So again, the steps each week, a couple days before or 3 or 4 days before your meeting, prepare, pray. Like a day or two before, remind your participants. I like to send a text message to remind people. Another idea that someone proposed I think is important in today's modern age is potentially using a Google Calendar event for your session every week, especially if it's virtual. Inviting your participants through email to that recurring calendar event is great because if they do opt into that, then they can get automatic notifications too. However, they have those set up in their preferences. So a recurring calendar event is great. Then the night of the meeting, preparing your room, setting up food, greeting, eating, then you lay out the curriculum, send the summary email, and then repeat every week. So those are kind of the steps. Do your best to stick to that 2-hour weekly meeting, but definitely be available before and after to talk to people. I can't remember a time ever in Reboot where we showed up right on time and left right on time. I mean, that's just not what we're there for. We're there for those individual conversations. And when people show up early or if they linger afterwards, that's usually their sign that they want to have the conversation, and maybe it's hard for them to start that. So notice that, be observant, have your radio or your antenna up or your Holy Spirit goggles on and be looking for those opportunities because that's where the real fruit happens, where the richness happens is when people are able to share what maybe they weren't comfortable sharing in front of everyone else, and you can start just building that relationship. That kind of dovetails into scheduling one-on-one meetings. So sometimes it's not feasible. You might have a line of people who want to talk to you after the group, which is great, but you want to schedule one-on-one meetings throughout the week if you can, or with some of your team members who are mentors, so people can have coffee or go on a walk and just kind of unload a little bit and get some more instruction from you. That's really, really beneficial for them. Of course, meeting with your leadership team throughout the duration of the course, like doing after-action reviews after your meetings. What could we have done better? What did we do well? What do we want to sustain? Don't settle if something can be better. So taking in everybody's perspectives, constantly be improving. And of course, contact HQ if you have any questions or needs. As we mentioned, we've got opportunities for you to do coaching calls or to jump on like a monthly group huddle because we want to be there to help you be successful. The next step is to measure effectiveness, and we do this in a couple of ways. One is we ask you to track participant attendance because we want to be able to, at any given time, know how many people Reboot is serving. We have to relay that information sometimes to grant funders, or we want to just be able to put that out into the world to show this is the impact that Reboot is having, especially for those who donate to us. They want to know who are we helping and how many of those people are there. And so give your attendance numbers to the coach or member services coordinator whenever they're asked of you. And then also, we do surveys and reminding your participants at week 1 and week 12 to do their welcome and exit surveys. We would be grateful for you to do that. The surveys are located in the participant's My Reboot account. So they have to have a My Reboot account to do the surveys, but that's easy. They just go and set up their free account, and it's right there. All right, so step 3, we're moving into the latter portion of the course session, weeks 7 through 12. At that time, you're going to start really seeing a lot of transformation. You're going to be seeing light bulbs going off every week in people. You're hopefully going to be hearing from them how Reboot is starting to impact them, and you want to be looking for next generation leaders because that member service is one of those key components of our DNA. It's something that we recognize that people want to find purpose in their pain, and they want to be able to pay it forward what they've gained from this Reboot experience. And so as a leader, the best thing that you can do for them is to give them opportunities to serve and to call out in them the greatness in them, the leadership traits and characteristics that they have, or the servanthood characteristics that they have, calling that out in them and saying, we need you. Because people gravitate to where they're needed, and that's where they're affirmed, and that's where they really grow. So be looking for that. Personally invite them. Don't just put out blanket invitations saying, oh, whoever wants to help next time, let me know. Call it out individually. Say, hey, Joe, I just saw you speak, and when you were speaking, did you notice how everyone in this group was listening? Everybody was nodding their heads. Something about what you said and the way you said it resonated with people even more so than they did from me. So I'm calling this out in you. I say that you have a future with leading, and I want to see if you want to be a part of the leadership team next time around, whatever that might look like. It's on you to really call it out. And then step 4 is graduation. And this is such an awesome, awesome way to mark not just the end of this journey, but the beginning of the next. It's such a way to celebrate that folks have put in the time, the emotional and spiritual energy to taking these steps and to peeling back the layers of the onion and getting to these heart and soul issues. And they want to celebrate it, and we want to celebrate it with them. So make a big deal out of graduation. Don't just say, oh, this is something that we have to do, go through the motions. Make a big deal. Celebrate your participants. Help them to realize what an accomplishment it is and to celebrate it by encouraging them to invite their friends. Invite your referral network. Invite the businesses that have supported you in your community. Invite your church community. Make it a big deal. Decorate. Do tablecloths and centerpieces and cakes and balloons, and have people share their testimonies. I mean, it can be such an incredibly motivating and inspiring night. I mean, just thinking back in the years of graduations I've witnessed, I always walk away just astounded by God's power, and it has really transformed my life to be able to see that. That's the beauty of being on this Reboot journey, is that it has enabled me to see miracles on a day-to-day basis because God is present and he is moving in these people's lives. So starting at week 8, start prepping for graduation, check in your Reboot checklist for what those steps might be. Again, take the opportunity to invite family members of participants, friends of participants, have them reach out to their neighbors, their coworkers who they think might need to know about Reboot, other people in the community. And then again, make sure that you may mention the exit survey, because that's your week 12. So we'd like for them to do that survey sometime during week 12 or in the week following from home on their My Reboot. So those are the steps of that stage. Now we're in stage 4, which is the reset and start again. And the beauty of the checklist, I forgot to mention this, is that you can clear it out and then start back at the beginning. So you work through it in a systematic way, but then the technology tool lets you reset it, and then you just go back to the beginning for your next course. So step 1 in this stage 4 is to equip new leaders. Any new leaders need to complete the required training before starting the next rotation. So getting them a My Reboot Leader Pass or Companion Pass is an important next step so that they can access all of the behind-the-scenes leader tools that you have access to. I mentioned this, step 2, prepare to start again, reset your checklist, follow each step as you go. If at any point you run into a problem, again, reach out to HQ, and the primary focus here is to make sure that you're successful. And I want to mention, when you're equipping new leaders, make sure that they do this training, this Reboot Leaders Academy. So gather them again with any new leaders before your next rotation and do this video training, because just because you know it doesn't mean that they know it by osmosis. So they need to hear the DNA from us, learn about all these steps as well, and get it ingrained into them before they step forward and lead.
A week in the life of a Reboot leader. What does it look like to facilitate a Reboot recovery program, whether it's first responder, combat, or trauma reboot? Well, interestingly enough, even though the topics are different and the approach is different, the planning and preparation really is the same. Over the next few minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what does a week in the life of a Reboot leader look like, right? And first, we want to look at 1 to 4 days prior to the group meeting. For me, I always go a week, right? So if we meet on Monday nights, the Monday before our group starts, what I'll do is I'll stop and I'll pray. And as I pray, I'm praying specifically for participants, for the rest of the leadership team, for the message, for whatever comes out of the material to be what God wills it to come out. But at the same time, that's when I start reading through the curriculum and writing bullet points, right? If for some reason the group was cut from an hour or 45 minutes down to 15 minutes, I want to know what the points that have to get out are. So I'll go through the curriculum, I'll write those points down. And I'll continue to pray. I'll continue to make sure that the points that I'm seeing as key are the points that he wants to share. So moving into 1 to 2 days prior to the group, that's when you notify the participants. Now, when they register, each participant puts what their primary mode of contact is going to be, whether it's email, phone, whatever they prefer. Use that, right? If they say texting is my preferred mode of communication, send them a quick text. Hey, this is Brian from Reboot Recovery. Just wanted to remind you, we're starting this week on Monday at 6 o'clock at this location. We're so excited to see you there. That's it, just a quick text. If they prefer email, that's fine. Send out the same thing in a quick email. Phone call, same way. 1 hour before the group starts. This is a very pivotal time, especially if it's your first group, right? Because you've done all this planning, all this preparation, all this outreach, all this work has gone into facilitating a course, and now here it is, the time that it's starting. So 1 hour before is when our leadership teams, they meet. They get the room set up, they pray together as a team, they pray to get ready for this group to start, they pray for the week, and then you have it, right? You have the time that group starts. So people start coming in, the seats are starting to be filled, the meal is starting to be served. And during that time, there are some things that are extremely important, right? First off is that they're greeted. What we do is we have a table right on the entrance that as people come in, we give them a name tag, have them sign in, and then we welcome them. From there, they're directed to where the food is or where the seating is, whatever that may be, but they're directed. And once they get there, we have graduates that are there that simply go over and say hello. Ask them how they're doing, how they found out about Reboot, and just start that conversation, start that community building, and this continues throughout the meal. Find things in common, where they're from, what they're up to, what they do for a living. Regular small chat just to help them, because you got to remember, this is their first time walking into a group, and they're probably a bit nervous. And you'll see that over the next 12 weeks, as they continue to come, that a lot of the barriers that they've already built up will start to bring down. And as those barriers, they'll start to open up more, they'll start to communicate more, and the community will continue to be built. The second hour of the meeting, that's where we start the course format, right? So starts with the intro of last week, unless it's the first week, with an icebreaker. Icebreakers are my favorite, right? A lot of people don't like them. They are absolutely my favorite because that icebreaker gives you another opportunity to break down barriers and at the same time find commonalities between you and the other people in the room. That's why I love the one about ice cream, because something so simple can be the first thing that somebody sees that they're not alone. 3 to 4 days after the course meets, that's when you'll send the email. Now remember, the email is already pre-prepared, sort of, the format, template, if you will, is already there on the My Reboot Leaders page. But I always add something personal to the group before, right? So maybe somebody had brought up an interesting point, or there was an icebreaker answer that was hilarious, or that made everybody giggle, or whatever it may be. I will somehow tie that into the email, because then it seems like it's more personal. It seems like it's written directly for them. And so when you send this email, you're really doing two things. One, you're continuing the process of chewing through whatever topic was covered on that group, but at the same time, you're continuing to show them that you're not just here that night, but together we're going to lock arms, we're going to stand against trauma, and we are going to overcome this together. Then the process starts all over for the next week. So it begins again with prayer. It begins again with starting to go through the curriculum, starting to pick out those bullet points, and it all just continues to repeat. And that is what a typical week for a Reboot leader looks like.
As we close this first session, I want to go through just a few things that are very detailed, frequently asked questions, things that it seems like a lot of our coaching calls, we get these questions. And I just want to give them to you as sort of raw points here at the end of our basic training session. First, people will ask, is there a minimum age for course participants? It's a very common question because we recognize that trauma impacts people of all ages, including those under 18 years of age. But as a rule of thumb, our curriculum was written for adults, meaning people who are 18 years of age and older. It is important that we recognize that, yes, of course, people have children or teenagers with trauma. However, that is considered a protected population, and there's also a lot of other mandatory reporting laws or all sorts of things that can make that a little bit more complex of a group. There's only one scenario where we will ever allow that to happen, and that is if we are working with an organization that specifically works with troubled youth, and they have clinicians and social workers, et cetera, that specialize in this field, then they are allowed to do that. But in terms of a general group at a church or on a base or at a precinct, whatever it may be, we recommend 18 and older. Also on that note, it's important to realize that some people ask, well, what about childcare? As you have children, recognizing that putting two 15-year-olds together in an office somewhere or in another room with iPhones while you're meeting is not a good idea. Right? You don't want to do that. So if you're going to need childcare, I recommend 10 and under for childcare. If they're older than 10 years old, they probably either need to have care at home or you need to have a special program that is geared towards kids that are a little bit older and teenagers. Just because people with devices over time, teenagers, stuff happens and you don't want that to happen on your time or in your group and create problems where that doesn't have to be. Another one of the really common questions we get asked is, when should I close the course for new participants? And we always say what? Week
3.
Week number 3. And there's a lot of reasons for that. What are some of the reasons?
Yeah, for one, the first 3 weeks are essentially foundation, right? They're foundational building. They're building up what's to come over the next 12 weeks. And we stop it at week 3 because starting week 4, the curriculum gets really tough. And on top of it getting really tough, if new faces are constantly coming in, the participants aren't going to open up.
Right.
That community, that authentic community isn't going to be able to build.
That's right. Wow, Jenny.
We really like to think of the first 3 weeks as sort of kicking the tire weeks. This is where it's open to people to come, give it a try, feel it out, because we know people are pretty skeptical. So we say that. We say come, but we do challenge people to give it the 3 weeks to decide before you decide that you're going to not participate, because we've actually done some research in that area, and those who complete the first 3 weeks, 80% of that group of people actually completes on to graduation. So really encourage your folks, even if they're kicking the tires, to just give it those 3 weeks before they make a decision.
That's great. Here's another one. How many participants is too many participants? What's an ideal group size? People always ask us this. The rule of thumb is we say 12 is like the magic number. Somewhere between 12 and 20, your group is going to be fantastic. If it's smaller than 12, that's fine too. Obviously, you have to have more than 2 people because that's not a group. But you get the idea that that's the number. If your group starts to climb much above 20, if you get up to the 25 or 30, there's a couple different options. Number one is you can meet week 1 and see if there's anybody that's a no-show, because there's a percentage of people that get really excited, they register, but then they don't show up. So you might see some attrition. Option number 2 is you can decide to break into multiple groups. Or option 3 is you could also facilitate the discussion and then break in to groups afterwards. Those are all ways to sort of shrink the size of your group, create opportunities for people to share. Much over 20 people, and it stops being a group and it starts being a sermon or a lecture. And that has happened to some of our groups. We've had 40, 50 people at some of our groups, and it's very, very, very difficult to facilitate a conversation, not to mention a lot of people are never going to get a chance to share because there's just too many people, right? So you might have some other questions. If you do, check out My Reboot. There's more resources there. And again, as Brian said, if you don't have a question answered by the end of your training today, schedule a coaching call, right? You can do that. So this concludes our first session. We hope that already you're starting to feel a little bit of confidence grow, and that not only do you know kind of who we are and what we do as an organization, but now you're going to be able to say, you know what, this is who I am, this is what I do. And you're starting to take some of that language as your own, and you'll get more and more comfortable with it as you go. We'll see you in just a few minutes for session number 2.